Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So today we're going to be doing a series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, but in this instance, something way more specific, way more exciting, and way more future thinking. That is because Taki Udon, just about 30 minutes ago on Twitter, was discussing the fact that he is now going to be producing an Agilex 5 FPGA board in the MiSTer Pi configuration for developers to start working on in the future. Now this announcement is absolutely fresh, and it's going to be a very technically dense video because I'm going to talk about what Agilex 5 means, what that chip does, and what it can mean for the future of FPGA gaming. Because obviously we already know Taki Udon and Retro Remake were able to clone the Jurassic DE10 board completely, making the own MiSTer Pi triple stack setup and bringing MiSTer FPGA to everyone for a lot cheaper price. As I've talked about on videos recently, the DE10 Nano, or the Cyclone 5 system on a chip, the FPGA chip with the ARM cores at the heart of MiSTer FPGA, is definitely getting long in the tooth, and it's basically maxed out at the Nintendo 64 and Sega Saturn era as far as gaming is concerned. And now with the cheaper MiSTer Pi triple stack out there, as well as the SuperStation One coming soon, we know that Retro Remake can deliver an economical product to the masses so you guys can enjoy your MiSTer FPGA without having to have that Jurassic DE10 board. So to know that Taki Udon is working on a new project on Agilex 5 is definitely exciting, but I know for most of you that isn't going to mean anything until I explain it. And because this is just an announcement, I don't have a lot of visuals to go with it, so we're going to be going over some of Intel's own documentation so I can explain to you just what this means and why you should be stoked. But today, Taki Udon said he had a good meeting with their Altera partner. Obviously, the most developers have partners where they source the chips from and deal with, and he says he's going to create an Agilex 5 engineering board in a modified MiSTer Pi form factor to see to developers. So we need to explain what that actually means. And I want to preface this with the following statement. MiSTer FPGA is not based on a custom-designed PCB for the project. It's an off-the-shelf part from Jurassic, the Jurassic DE10 Nano, which was cloned by Retro Remake with the same exact Cyclone 5 chip on it. That's why we have the triple stack, and we have other adapter boards to make it purpose-built for gaming as best as we can. But think about something like the SuperStation One coming from Taki Udon, which we talked about yesterday. That is a custom-designed PCB with ports and a layout that are meant to be gaming-focused, not just design focused. When I last talked about a potential MiSTer 2, I talked about Agilex 5 as being the go-to chip, which would make the most sense for the project based on its existing tool chain and software development environment, which we'll get into in just a bit. Taki Udon also talks about a 1-year guarantee or until they can't produce them to make sure that the boards are open source, just like MiSTer FPGA is. Now, I'm not definitively saying this is going to be MiSTer FPGA 2, but it makes the most sense because people have been looking at the Jurassic DE25 board, but again, you'd have to wait for a Nano variant, and that is a much higher price point, and we know that Taki Udon and Retro Remake can already spin up a board and make it work because we have the MiSTer Pi. Now, on the Agilex 5 series of FPGAs, there are 2 series, one with ARM cores included and one without, and I'd pretty be sure that it would be using the ARM core series just like MiSTer FPGA does for the low-level Linux things and other little bits of housekeeping that the operating system has to do. The nice thing is it has a 50% lower power consumption versus the Cyclone 5 FPGAs, and it also has a 2.5 times faster fabric performance compared to the Cyclone 5. And if fabric performance doesn't mean much to you, just think of it this way. It runs 2.5 times faster as far as the actual transmission of data can be concerned. It gets a lot more technical than that, but I don't want to really bog this down with a massive amount of technical details. The biggest chip that they provide is 650,000 logic elements, and remember the Jurassic DE10 Nano or the clones with the Cyclone 5 use a total of 110,000 logic elements, so you're getting almost 6 times potentially bigger of an FPGA chip to put all of those gaming cores and everything else on, and that is absolutely wild. They talk about the use cases and applications as far as development, different AI functions, but this could also mean that we could have an FPGA chip and board that would have more than enough logic elements, more than enough ability to run the CPU speeds, and all of the RAM throughput to do something like a Dreamcast core. But I want to be very clear about something. Just because a chip can handle something does not mean it's going to come anytime soon. These chips are only as good as the humans that are writing code to them, so you have to wait for the people to make the cores. So just because I talk about the fact that this chip at 650,000 logic elements definitely would have the ability to have a Dreamcast core does not mean that anyone's actually working on it, and it doesn't mean that it might not take 2 to 3 years to actually finish. This is a very forward-looking thing, and you'll see here, as Taki Udon mentioned, the different capabilities of the Agilex 5 from the 138,000 logic element unit to the 650,000 logic element unit. There is a range in which they could produce these boards on, and I would definitely hope it would be up towards the higher end and not the 138,000 logic element unit, because even though LEs aren't a linear measure, more means better, but it doesn't mean in a linear fashion. If you think about the Sega Saturn core, that's basically maxing out almost all of the logic elements on the Cyclone 5 on MiSTer FPGA to 110,000 logic elements. Or if you put a chip like something like this on board with 656,000 logic elements, you see where you get that almost 6 times the LEs as far as the board is concerned. And think of it like generations in chips. I have an i9-12900K in my computer. You can have an i9 second generation chip running near to the same clock speed. That does not mean they are the same chip. It's a different generation with a completely different performance curve and a lot of other features set. And something like Nintendo 64, again, almost filling up the 110,000 logic elements on MiSTer FPGA. Additionally, you have different maximum embedded memory, which is getting used by the system, and you also have those ARM dual cores right there, both the A76 as well as the A55. And if you're thinking that seems like a massive crap ton of logic elements for any sort of game design, remember, the logic elements can also host these scalars. Something like the RetroTrink 4K has a chip that has almost 200,000 logic elements in it, and that's just built for scaling. So if you put that 656,000 logic element chip on this board and you call it a quote-unquote MiSTer 2, and something like Dreamcast only uses 300,000 logic elements, think how much would be left over at the end to scale an image to 4K, because right now that Thoracic DE25 standard development kit board with an Agilex 5 still only has 1080p video output on it, where if you're designing a custom board with an Agilex 5 on it like Taki Udon is talking about, then you can make sure it is 4K capable all day long, and you'd have the space in the FPGA to actually write that scalar. And as far as Agilex 5 making the most sense, and this is where it gets pretty deep, this is using Quartus Prime. That is basically, for lack of a better term, the toolchain or software development kit for writing the code to something like the Cyclone 5 on MiSTer FPGA. So if developers of the MiSTer project are looking for a new platform, a lot of them would probably want to stay on the exact same toolchain. It's like when I make all these videos, either for my professional work or for YouTube. I've been using DaVinci Resolve for forever now. Could I use something like Adobe Premiere? I probably could. Would it take me forever to get up to speed using it because it's a completely different project to do the same thing? Absolutely. I like Resolve, I'll never leave it. Some people like stuff like Quartus because they know exactly how to code for it. And again, last time we talked about the DE25 standard, that's exactly what I said, is that staying on Quartus is going to be useful, but again, having a board that's custom designed would be so much better than trying to use off the shelf. And we know full well Taki Udon Retro Remake can make an incredible looking console as well, even if they're just talking about a triple stack off the Agilex 5 right now. But that's how these things usually work. You get developer boards, you get review boards, people start working on it, and once there's actually the ecosystem, and then you can start producing the pretty things, because pretty much every single MiSTer FPGA core could be ported to this new board and chip, because it is still in the same Altera and Intel Nuclear family and would still be working on Quartus. And that makes a very big difference, because if you do want to port MiSTer FPGA cores to a new project that you could call MiSTer FPGA 2 with all of the same developers and people that work on it involved, then you wouldn't have to worry about actually going to a different toolchain on a different FPGA chip from a different manufacturer. It is much easier to move forward staying inside of Quartus and staying inside the Altera family. And that's why you see stuff like SuperStation One. It is just an evolution of the Thoracic DE10 board and the MiSTer Pi board and the triple stack. Once you get the hardware working, once the entire environment is ready to develop for, once everyone is on board, that's when you can start making fun console designs later on. But again, we have seen Retro Remake produce these boards. They work exactly the same as a Thoracic DE10. We've reviewed them on the channel, and we know a lot of people are out there using them and even waiting for something like that actual SuperStation One to chip. And it seems like Taki Udon and Retro Remake are definitely looking forward to the future, because again, MiSTer FPGA is a very robust platform with a ton of cores, but it is kind of feeling a little bit like that FPGA doesn't have any more breathing room, because after Nintendo 64, Sega Saturn, and PlayStation 1, you jump up to Dreamcast. And before you say the words out loud, GameCube, Xbox, or PlayStation 2, I can't stress enough how incredibly difficult those machines would be to reproduce an FPGA. Think of this more as Dreamcast, as more advanced arcade boards, as more advanced cores, and maybe even some improvements on cores we already have with that additional FPGA space. But Taki Udon is making a new board. Obviously, he just started talking about it. This could be 6 months, 12 months, 18 months into the future, but I wanted to tell you guys the news first, because you know I love talking about MiSTer FPGA on the channel, and I've been saying for about a year now that I feel like Agilex 5 is going to be where this project goes in the future, and that seems to be what's happening. If you have any questions or need clarification, leave it down below, but we're done. This was a surprise video, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.